Brooklyn Independent Television.
I'm Joel Schlemowitz, and I'm a filmmaker here in New York. I make experimental films, and we're here at Anthology Film Archives, one of the important repositories for avant-garde and experimental and underground film here in New York, and also a place that's very active in showing, preserving, presenting, and celebrating work of avant-garde and experimental cinema. It is a place I've shown some of my short films, also a place where I've done exhibits of installation work using film. History of avant-garde film in New York, actually, if you look at Anthology, before it was the Filmmakers Cooperative, the Charles Theater, the Filmmakers Cinematheque, and places like the Collective for Living Cinema. And so there really has been an experimental film community in New York that really dates back and has very deep roots. And it's a community that still is very active with new people showing work at places like Anthology, Millennium Film Workshop, and Light Industry out in Brooklyn in Sunset Park. I'd studied filmmaking when I was at school. It was really a little later on that I went to a screening at a place called the Collective for Living Cinema, where a local filmmaker, Barbara Hammer, was presenting work. Her work really was something that struck me at that moment. Here was someone doing what the short experimental film sort of is at its heart, not trying to be something derived from narrative, but very direct, playful, poetic work. This film that I did called Boulder, Brooklyn was actually a collaboration with a filmmaker who had moved out to Boulder, Colorado. And we decided to do a film together, mailing a roll of film back and forth, shooting on that roll of film, and double exposing the images. So neither of us knew what the other person was shooting. The images would now be melded on top of each other through shooting on the same piece of film, and it wouldn't be until we got the film back from the lab that we would know what the results were. Yeah, there are many different words to describe avant-garde film or experimental film or underground film. Sometimes the terms can all be used interchangeably. Sometimes they can be used very specifically, like underground film, is work that really has a counterculture to it, both in what's being done and then how it's being done and who is doing it. Never use the term avant-garde all that much to talk about my work. It sounds, a little too lofty. I prefer underground or experimental. Some people have a hard time with the word experimental film, feeling that it's kind of belittling to this art form, that you're only just experimenting. You haven't really figured out what you're doing. I don't know if I really have a problem with the term, though. We're seeing something that was, produced not through, since dreaming up effects to layer onto the film through post-production. We're seeing something that was produced entirely just utilizing the camera as an artistic tool. Try to sort of explore film as this tactile medium. It is, in the camera, this physical piece of film, the camera's letting light in and exposing the film. Well, one can let in more light, one can let in less, one could do things with the camera in terms of the way you are manipulating the image. You can take the film after it's been shot and use it as a little physical canvas to paint, to scratch. I know some people who talk about the film with its layer of emulsion being kind of like the skin of the human body, and treating that emulsion as the surface is really sort of talking about the film as this living thing. Never is like sort of sitting down, having an idea in one's head that's like the fully formed idea, and then it's only just a question of making it. It's always wondering about, could one sort of depict this through this way of approaching the film, and not always knowing how it's going to turn out. There are, less constraints in that sense. It's harder because, if there were rules and constraints, you know better what you want to do or need to do. But there is something very liberating and exhilarating about, working in this fashion, making your own rules.
Brooklyn Independent Television on the BCAT TV network.